From the News Channel 5 Network, this is MorningLine.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. Nick Barris here on a Thursday. We've got a good show on tap for you. You know, we did open phones on Wednesday. So today, we have a topic of conversation that actually made some headlines earlier this week here in Nashville alone. By now, of course, you've heard the terms human trafficking, sex trafficking, slavery, and all of that. Nashville, earlier this week, and there's a big news conference, we did a story on it. Judge Casey Moreland heading it up, launching the first in-state court program dedicated, it's a court program in his courtroom dedicated to identifying and helping victims of human trafficking. And we're going to get into exactly what that means. And I'm not talking about traffic on the roads. I think you know what we're referring to here. The sex trade and women in situations sometimes held against their will. The definition of it, I think, is important to get to the heart of this morning. And we're going to do that with our guest who is with End Slavery Tennessee. Andrea Johnson's with us. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Nick.
Nice to have you on.
Thank you for having me.
End Slavery Tennessee.
Yes.
That's the organization. You're familiar with this that Metro's doing, correct?
Absolutely.
With this court.
We were at the press conference.
Okay. Good thing?
Absolutely. We're very excited about it.
And what if you would, does this mean? How does it change what we had prior to this, where we would address it, to having this? It puts it in the spotlight, something that directly will address the issue?
Well, I think it not only does it put it in the spotlight and bring it, out into the open, but also it really changes the way that we approach victims of human trafficking. So in the past, when you would go through a regular court system, you're treated as a criminal. You're there facing charges. Mm-hmm. What Judge Moreland has done with drug court and now will do with trafficking court is really recognize that these women and sometimes men actually are there because they are actually victims of a crime and not criminals themselves.
Good. Okay, and that leads me to my next question, so we can identify for folks what exactly is human trafficking, or as you would say, slavery. I mean, we all know slavery. When you think slavery, you think about the African-American experience in this country and all of that, but slavery in modern day times, and how does it differ in some ways from prostitution, or are they all one and together?
Well, as the Assistant District Attorney Tammy Mead was saying at the press conference, the charge of prostitution does not go away. It really doesn't change. The court doesn't change the law. But the difference between prostitution and trafficking is the presence of force, fraud, or coercion. Gotcha. So for adults, if an adult has been forced or fraudulently tricked or coerced into a commercial sex act, that constitutes trafficking. For a minor, we know that minors cannot consent to sex legally. So
that's a whole different ballgame.
Force, fraud, and coercion don't have
That's
to be.
all wrong
they're
at
all
every
victims,
level.
right?
I guess my point is, in prostitution, and any woman that is doing this, I don't care what they tell you, they didn't imagine someday becoming prostitutes. But there is a difference in my mind, and you tell me if I'm wrong, between maybe someone who's brought here from someplace else against her will by some people and prostituted out, and someone who maybe is just hit on hard times. They're going to school, they have a kid, and they decide on their own to go street walk to make some cash on their own. Okay, I view the second example there not as human trafficking. That's choice by them. It's the wrong choice. It's prostitution. It's a crime. And they would prefer not to do it. Maybe they figure they have no other options, and I sympathize with them. But am I right in saying that that second example is not human trafficking?
That's not trafficking.
Okay. I just want to be clear on that. So give me an example of what a case of human trafficking is that we've seen of late. A scenario by which that definition fits.
By which the definition
what's human trafficking? Or what are we talking about? Someone who's been brought here from out of the country to be a sex slave?
Well, I can just give you a case that we've worked with at End Slavery. So we have a situation where there was a young teenager who was at a party, like many teenagers, any normal teenager. She was drugged at the party, and when she woke up, she discovered that she had been raped basically by every man at the party. They then threatened her with, if you don't cooperate with what we're asking, we'll do this to your little sister. We know where you live. They had videoed the entire episode. We'll show it to your family. We'll show it to the people at school. And so
they tried to use that to get her to work with them and become
at this
sex
point,
slave?
basically, the shame and degradation you feel from
But she was raped. What you just described there. This was not someone that was grabbed and then put. Initially, there was a crime committed, and these idiots videotaped it.
Right.
And is this a case where she, because of the shame, didn't realize? Well, go ahead, because we've got video of the crime happening, and you're going to go to jail for the next 40 years.
Yeah,
we nail you. She was scared.
They were holding her against her will in that scenario, obviously.
But did she go home the next day and realize what had happened?
No, they kept her. They held her captive,
gosh.
basically.
Really? Okay.
There are several different kinds of traffickers, but some traffickers that are particularly brutal, we call those guerrilla pimps. So in this particular situation, the people that were holding her were particularly brutal to her, and they basically just continue until the will is broken, and they get cooperation out of these girls.
And they make money on this.
And they make money on it. And then that's the whole issue of trafficking. These are bad people profiting off of the misfortune of someone else.
Now, we should say, by the way, when we talk about slavery and human trafficking, it's not always sex related, correct? I mean, there can be other issues. I mean, it can be bonded labor,
Absolutely.
forced labor, child labor.
Absolutely.
I mean, putting someone to work or something like that against their will and forcing them to do things, correct?
Absolutely. We don't see as many cases here of labor trafficking as we do with sex trafficking. The majority of the cases that we work with are victims of sex trafficking, but certainly we do know that it's happening here in the state, and we have resources to help those folks as well.
Would sex trafficking be also then applying to a prostitution ring where there's a pimp and he's got a stable of women that he pimps out, but they're with him. Now, maybe they're intimidated by him, and it's hard for them to walk away, but many of them may be willingly doing this for the money. Is that sex trafficking or not?
Well, in those situations, there are pimps or traffickers who we call Romeo pimps, who are more like a boyfriend, and that's actually a very common lure that traffickers use, especially with younger minors and girls. They boyfriend these girls and treat them well, maybe better than they've ever been treated in their life. They shower them with gifts. They make them feel like they're loved and they're going to be protected and safe. And then, one thing leads to another. Just do this for me once. We need the rent money, whatever lure they need to use to get the girl to just agree the first time. And after the first time, again, usually the shame and it's just overwhelming, and they've kind of got them hooked at that point. So you're right, there are traffickers that have what's known as a stable with several women. There will be a hierarchy sometimes within the stable among the women. But we know that the trauma bonds that are formed between a trafficker and a victim sometimes are greater than actual physical bonds. So if you're bonded to this person and you're dependent on them 100% for your well-being, it's something that's difficult to understand, but sometimes that's even more powerful than being chained up and not allowed to leave.
Okay, I think you've seen that.
Absolutely,
the bond and
that's actually more
break.
Typical.
It almost sounds like a battered woman syndrome to some degree.
Very similar.
They're afraid to leave, or they become dependent, and they're controlled mentally.
If you think about the fact that you are literally dependent on this person for your life, many different situations and scenarios, but this person is providing everything for you, you can't imagine how you could provide for yourself. It really becomes a situation where you can't leave, and you're dependent on them, so you have emotional ties to them, as hard as that is to get your head around.
It's important then for people to understand, as you describe, and we hear this in battering situations, that is, why don't you just leave? There's the simplistic, ignorant question. You just explained why they can't just leave.
Right.
In a situation like that, they feel like they have no place else to turn. What amazes me, and I'm in the news business, and we cover prostitution stings, and we've done our share of stories on sex trafficking, but I didn't realize, I suppose, that it's as big as it is. Is there an entire subculture there? Because, and I said this the other day promoting this show, this exists primarily because there's a market for
Absolutely.
it. That's what makes me want to puke. You can get mad at these people that do this to these women, but they wouldn't be doing it if they weren't making money, meaning there's a market for it. What kind of slime bags, and I understand they range through every economic scale, from the poor to the rich, that take advantage of it. I'm still baffled. I have friends who have gone to prostitutes, and I'm not through something like this, but in Vegas or whatever. What are you doing?
Right.
And for some, it's normal. I had a friend who told me his dad took him to a prostitute to lose his virginity. I mean, where does that come from? And I don't realize. So, can you give us a number? How big, or how many women are, like in Tennessee? Maybe do you estimate involved in this right now?
Well, we know that Judge Moreland actually quoted this week at the press conference. He said that Davidson County saw 600 cases of adults last year and over 100 cases involving minors. We know that there are 94 minors a month in the state of Tennessee estimated recruited into sex trafficking. So that is
just hard to imagine.
To get your head around.
Do they go after then obviously they try to catch them, and then there's no sense when you get these minors or these women in, when they've been in this, you shouldn't charge them with prostitution. They've been victims here as well.
Absolutely.
That's the way I look at it. But are they also trying to go after the customers?
They do. The way that the law enforcement works is they do different stings. You'll see stings where they're just arresting Johns, and then they have stings where they're going in and actually just trying to bring the girls out and rescue the girls. And normally, when TBI in particular will do a sting to rescue girls, we'll have our Director of Survivor Services, Sheila McLean, is actually in a room to receive the girls. Once TBI does their questioning, the girls go into the room with Sheila, and Sheila is able to offer them help and a way out. And she's able to connect with the girls on a whole different level than what a law enforcement officer can connect.
Well, listen, on that note, we have to take a break. When we come back, we'll take some phone calls. Your thoughts on this? We've got some folks already in on the line, 737-7587. But sex trafficking, it's not just adults, it's children that are brought into it. It's just amazing to me that the market continues, especially when there's groups cracking down. But, you've watched, it's just like pedophiles. Okay, you watch that show, To Catch a Pedophile. It's everywhere on TV. They're getting busted in stings left and right, and it still is rampant. And I've done so many stories on child pornography, and the appetite for that garbage exists. There's a lot of sickness out there. We're going to take a break. When we come back, and I'm not talking about the women that perpetrate, I'm talking about the customers.
Right.
They're all sick, and I have an idea of how I would deal with them. Can you say castration? We'll take a break. I will be back with your phone calls right after this. Slam.